Today we're going to talk about Japan. We'll look at the culture and the different aspects of its history and everything. All right, here we go. All right, so population patterns. So the people, so Japan's population is ethnically homogenous. So what that means is everybody's pretty much of the same ethnicity. So they don't have any kind of really ethnic conflict because they are all ethnically Japanese. So 99% of the people there are descendants of the migrants who came over from Korea centuries ago, and those people settled into primarily into this area right here, and then eventually they're going to expand further north. But it's going to force those Ainu, who are the Aboriginals, to move farther north, and they're going to move north up this way here. Okay. All right. So density and distribution. So Japan has limited land for its very large population. So they have a lot of cities that are very densely populated. So central Japan has forested mountains, so people live in the valleys and the coastal plains. So you can see that they live where they primarily live is in this area here. So there's a lot of valley area in this region right here is where they have most of their agriculture. And then this is where Tokyo is. This is where they have a lot of the cities in that. Okay. So Tokyo is the world's most populous urban area at 35 million people. They have hundreds of skyscrapers that tower over their cities. This right here is a picture of Tokyo at night. Very colorful, a lot of neon signs in Tokyo. Most people live in tiny 1 to 2 bedroom apartments. But as you expand out into more of the suburbs, they do have larger homes than what you see in Tokyo, but in comparison to suburban homes in the United States, those are very, very small. Okay. All right. So history and government. So in the early history, China and Korea are going to have a significant impact on Japan's civilization because most of the people are descendants of the people who came over from Korea. So in the 400s, Japan was ruled by clans. So those are large family groups, and they had a feudal type system. Okay, they were eventually united under the Yamato dynasty, and they adopted China's philosophy, writing system, art, sciences, and type of government. So once again, China is that culture heart. So they're going to copy the type of government and a lot of their culture. So by the 1100s, the armies of the nobles started to fight for control of Japan. So Yoritomo Minamoto is going to be the first shogun or military ruler, and this is really when the feudal system really starts. So the samurai, that's these guys down here, are going to protect the shogun, and they will help govern the country until the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, that's when they start to interact more with the Europeans and the United States. So technically, they are ruled by an emperor, but the shogun is the one who has all the power because he's the one who controls the military. 1542, they're going to make their first contact with the West, so that means Europe. This happens when a Portuguese ship that was looking for China was blown off course and went to Japan on accident. Following that, they're going to see more traders and missionaries come. And then the shoguns, however, didn't like this. They feared that the Europeans were going to come in and try to conquer them, and so they restricted foreigners in Japan, and they're going to stay isolated for about 200 years. So kind of like North Korea is now, where they're totally isolated from other countries. That's kind of how Japan was. In the 1800s, the U.S. worked to open Japan up for trade. A lot of that had to do with the U.S. didn't get in on the spheres of influence in China, and so they were trying to look for a new trade partner. And so Japan seemed like a likely option. In 1854, the U.S. Navy is going to pressure Japan to trade with them, but the rebel samurai are going to force the shoguns to return full power to the emperor, and then the emperor is going to cooperate more with the United States and the Europeans. So their new government is going to modernize the economy. The government is going to become more efficient. they're going to modernize military, education, and the legal system. Their education system is actually going to be modeled after the U.S. system, and this is known as the Meiji Restoration. In the 1890s to the 1940s, Japan is going to go from a feudal system to a more modern system, and this is going to be known as cultural convergence, because what's going to happen is they're going to start to mix cultures with the Europeans and the United States. So there's a saying in Japan that uh, I don't know exactly how it goes, but it basically goes that they take the best parts of culture and make it their own. Okay, so they're going to use diplomacy and military force in order to build an empire, and so they're going to start a war with China in 1894 to 1895. They're going to gain Taiwan, and then they're going to fight what's called the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and 1905, and they'll gain Manchuria and Sakhalin, so that's an area in eastern China. And then Japan is going to annex Korea in 1910. So they're building an empire. Okay, now this Russo-Japanese War is kind of interesting because Teddy Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States at the time, he is going to negotiate the peace between Russia and Japan, and he is actually going to be the first president to win a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Okay. So this expansion is going to lead Japan to fight against the Allies in World War II, so they're going to fight for the Axis powers. You can see the extent of their empire by the time 1939 rolls around right here. So this right here is Manchuria, right in this area. So they gain everything in here that's red. So they have a pretty extensive empire at this point. But after World War One, and in World War One they did fight with us. After World War One, they will experience prosperity, and their military leaders will gain influence over their government. 1931, they will invade Manchuria, and then in 1936, they will sign a pact with Nazi Germany that will ally them with Nazi Germany. 1937, they'll invade China, and they're going to sit there and wait until Pearl Harbor, basically. In 1941, end of 1941, the Japanese will attack Pearl Harbor, and that's in a response to the U.S. didn't want them to build a huge empire, and so what we did is we put an oil embargo on them, and that drastically hurt their infrastructure and their factories and things. They couldn't, and the military, creating more military weapons. So in reaction to that oil embargo, they're going to attack Pearl Harbor, which obviously is in Hawaii, and that's going to bring the U.S. into war. So Japan will be involved in World War II for about 4 years. So from the end of 1941, we'll declare war the very next day. December 8th, 1941 is when we declare war. So then in 1941 until 1945, when they surrender. So in the process, they're going to lose about 3 million lives. And the biggest thing is that they suffer dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the U.S., to end the war, dropped 2 atomic bombs, the first on Hiroshima and then the second on Nagasaki. And it was after that second one that they finally surrendered, and they surrendered on a battleship in August of 1945. Okay. So this right here is a little better map showing the Empire of Japan. So you can see, obviously, what's in red is Japan. And then there's Manchuria right there, there's Korea, so Inner Mongolia. So this is all the area that they had gained. Pretty big empire, especially considering how far it all is by water. So pretty large empire. Okay, so after they surrender in 1945, Japan has become a democracy. They still do have an emperor, but they're more like a system of government closer to Britain, okay, where the emperor doesn't really have a ton of power. But they're going to lose all their territory. They're just going to be Japan. And then they also don't have a military. So what they do have, it's called Japanese Self-Defense Forces, and it's basically a national guard. And not allowed to leave Japan without specific permission from the United Nations. And so the US basically acts as their Navy and Air Force if they do need it, usually. But they will rebuild their shattered economy and society. And by the late 1900s, they were the second largest global economic power. Today, they're now the third largest. And a lot of that has to do with they have a lot of different products that they have made. So these are obviously all car brands here. Nintendo, anime, and Pokemon, those have been very big. So they have made a lot of money. They've had a lot of influence culturally on the United States with all of these things, and they continue to create new technologies even to this day. So culture, so education and healthcare. Education is very highly valued in Japan. So early on, students focus on getting into good schools, and then so they go basically to elementary school to get into a good high school. So school is required up to age 15, and then once they get to high school, if they get to high school, it is designed to prepare them for college. Okay, so where we educate everyone up through high school, um, they educate everyone basically through middle school, and then they kind of track kids almost a middle school type uh, as to what kind of career path they're going to follow. Okay, whether that's going to be um, like a chemist or some sort of like doctor or lawyer, or if you're going to be like in a trade or something to that effect. Okay, so they track kids very early on. Their healthcare has improved life expectancy to 82 years, which is pretty darn high. And their government does provide preventative care. They don't actually get insurance from their employer, so the government provides insurance. But they have a lot more freedom to choose doctors and things like that in Japan than we do, or not than we do, but than a lot of countries that we've seen. Okay. Language and religion. So Japanese language may be related to Korean and Mongolian. So there's borrowed words and writing even from Chinese. So it's kind of a blending of the three. Um, and even Western language, especially English, has influenced Japanese as well. As far as religion goes, many practice Buddhism or Shintoism. Shintoism is the state religion of Japan, and it is an indigenous religion. So it's an ancient religion that stresses reverence for nature. Their religious practices tend to blend those religions, so they might celebrate Shinto rituals. They might have a Christian wedding and then hold a funeral for the same person in a Buddhist temple. So, like I said before, they kind of take different aspects of different cultures and kind of take what they like about it and make it their own. This right here is called a torii. It's Torii, is how you spell it. A torii is basically the entrance into any Shinto temple. Okay. The arts. So throughout history, artists have painted the landscape of Japan. So most paintings you see are of landscapes. Oftentimes they'll have buildings in it, but more ancient looking buildings like this. Other art forms you see origami, tea ceremony, landscaping, and then kabuki theater. So these pictures here, this shows kabuki theater, which is kind of similar to the Chinese opera, not nearly as big. This right here is a tea ceremony. And then this down here is origami. So this is not one piece of paper. Usually origami is one piece of paper. This is a bunch of pieces of paper kind of put together. And then Lady Murasaki Shikibu wrote one of the world's first novels called The Tale of Genji. And that was about the life and loves of a prince at the imperial court. Poetry, haiku is probably the most famous form of poetry that comes from Japan. So haikus have 3 lines and then 17 syllables, and usually they vary in combination. There's no set haiku line, but it kind of, I don't know, usually I've heard 575, but there's no set rules on it on a haiku because it's art. There's no set rules in art. Okay. So family life and leisure. So family is a source of stability and strength. Ancient traditions and beliefs shape how children are raised. So they have a very strong sense of family, and so but their ideas are that being a part of a group is more important than the individual. So being part of the family is more important than you. So honoring your family name and doing things to make your family look good, or you know, helping your family out, different things like that, are all good things. Um, and then Japanese people have experienced acculturation, which is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. So once again, that's taking culture, forms of popular culture from another country, and making it their own. So, for example, baseball is probably the best example of that. So, we got a picture of Ichiro right here, who was a famous Seattle Mariner baseball player and Hall of Fame, well, future Hall of Famer, and he started out in the Japanese leagues, and then he became a major league star. And we've seen a lot of former Japanese league players come to the United States and do very well. Okay. All right. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. You guys have a wonderful day.